I used to see him often. Well, I guess I shouldn't say him, more like it. I don't... Then I moved away, to another state, another city. I don't see it anymore. Not physically, though it creeps through my mind in its swooping, slinking way. High up in the air, then sliding across the ground, the next, over and over, its limbs propelling it forward. The mere thought sends ice-cold shivers running down my spine. It used to watch me, but it can't anymore. At least, I don't think it can. I wouldn't be surprised, however, to wake in this early hour of the day, when the sky is still dark, and look to my window and see those eyes, those teeth, see it smile, that awful smile. I hope I'm dead before that day arises. I hope I've seen the last of that monster. When I was little, I lived in a small suburban neighborhood. It isn't the kind that you're probably thinking of. Big, white, uniform houses, all lined up in perfect rows with green lawns and 2 garage doors. No. My neighborhood was much older. It was built sometime in the 50s. Every house looked different, but most had started to fall apart. The people living there were hard-working, honest for the most part, and their long, hard lives showed on their faces. No one really talked to each other. That was one of the only things I didn't like about the neighborhood. My mother always said the neighbors just liked to keep to themselves, that they had nothing very important to say anyway. Looking back on it now, I think that they did have something important to say. Something very, very important. I saw it for the first time when I was 8 years old, during the summer. It was very hot that season, unusually so compared to all the other summers that I had since. So, I'd stay inside most of the morning. And then after lunch, my father hooked up the sprinkler that we used for our garden in our backyard. I excitedly got into play clothes and rushed outside, into the blinding sun. Those were the days. Those innocent days in the sun where I just played without a care. I had no idea that I'd soon be missing them. So, I was outside running and laughing and jumping through the cold spray of water when I saw it. At first I didn't notice it. It was just a rustle in the bushes. Then it was the crack of a branch, and I looked up. Something dark moved through those leaves, something as black as midnight, yet it shimmered when the sun hit it. It ran, or galloped. I wasn't sure what to call it. I'm still not. From a small forest behind my house, leapt over my neighbor's fence and disappeared from my view. I was curious, so I chased it, and the pavement burnt my feet, but I didn't care. I watched, along with a few other neighbor children, as the creature swept in and out of the shadows of trees, making its way up the street. It was large, probably about 8 feet tall if it stood upright, though it never did. Instead, it stayed hunched over, its hind legs curled up at its sides, the knees protruding grotesquely past its torso. Large, white curled claws grew from its bony fingers, and long, slender fingers at that. Its arms were gnarled, the joints bulging under twisted muscle and skin that was black and rubbery, stretched thin over whatever bone the beast had. It caved in at odd places and almost looked as if it were rotting. Still, when it crept through the sun, patches glistened gray and blue as if it were made of some kind of foreign glass. Then there was its face. The skin was the same, stretching over an oblong oval skull that jutted out in the back. Its eyes were sunken deep within its head, large and round and hollow. They glowed a weird white yellow, one I'm sure didn't have a name to this day. Really, it wasn't even glowing. It was more of a pulsating, ever-present light that seemed to come straight from the non-existent soul deep within the monster's core. It always seemed to smile. Its mouth was stretched like its skin, far across its face. You know the expression, grinning ear to ear. It was literal in this case, each corner reaching each side of its face where ears would have been, if it had any. Within this smile were 2 rows of pure white teeth, long and sharp. In fact, each tooth was so long it could never close its mouth. The sharp tips just clicked and clacked against each other as it skulked around, waving its head slowly from side to side as if sniffing something in the air. I used to find this silly, since it had no nose, and now the thought just terrifies me. We kids just watched it in a sort of dazed amazement, never having seen anything like it before. I suppose I thought that it just was some species I'd yet to learn about in school. I wish that's all that it had been. Then our parents called us back inside for dinner, and we grudgingly obeyed, not wanting to get in trouble. I'm not sure about the other kids, but I never quite forgot about the creature that I'd seen. I got preoccupied with other things, sure, but its image was always in the back of my mind, burning there, waiting for me to remember it's late at night, while I tried to drift off to sleep. It got its wish. That night, I was lying in bed with my covers pulled up to my chin, despite how hot that I was. The nightlight across my room barely gave me comfort from the thoughts of ghouls and ghosts hiding in my closet under my bed. Then the beast's image slipped into my thoughts. I gripped my covers. It hadn't scared me before, yet I'd been mere feet away from it. But now, having that image sit in my mind all day, my brain registering its unworldly appearance, I started to fear it. It was bad, I knew that now. Then I heard a tap. I froze. Another tap. I didn't dare move. There was another, and another, and another. It was at my window. I could hear its long claws scrape against the glass, hear its razor-sharp fangs as they clicked against each other. I could hear its breathing. Heavy. Husky. In and out. In and out. Finally, I could no longer bear it. I tore my eyes from my nightlight and gazed through the dark room toward my window. It smiled when it saw me, an impossibly huge grin that split its face in two, white teeth glistening with saliva, gleaming eyes, seeming to pull every fear from my conscious and unconscious to the surface. I screamed, and by the time my parents rushed to my room, it was gone. No traces of existence left behind. They said it was just a nightmare. It wasn't just a nightmare. I never saw it in the daytime again, but I saw it every night. After a week, I stopped screaming. I just cried silently in my bed. Then after another week, I stopped crying. It knew I was scared. I wasn't going to give it the satisfaction of seeing me tremble. It wasn't until it found the lock on my window that I was truly terrified. I'll never forget the clunk the lock made when it had opened or been moved for the first time in years, or the warning screech of the window as it slid open, or the heavy breathing at my bedside. I'll never forget those eyes as they gazed at me from beyond my covers. It knew I was scared. It thrived on that. It wouldn't leave me alone. Everyone says I went crazy, but I didn't. It just wouldn't leave me alone. I hardly ever slept. My hair started to fall out, and I always looked tired. My parents put me here in this psychiatric hospital. It's a nut house. That's what it is. I'm not crazy. It's been years. Years. The nightmares still happen when I do sleep, so they keep me here. I suppose I like it better this way, though. After all, the monster couldn't get me here. You know, the funny thing is, I can't even remember where I used to live. I can't remember the state or the city. I can't even remember the country. Into the mind of a facility once inhabited by patients of over-eccentric minds, now swollen by dust, ash, and the crackling voices, muffled by the sounds of darkened memories. The doors sway in an eerie back and forth in subtle motion. A spine-chilling creak spills into the dead air with each sway of the age-eaten doors. There is little light. It's difficult for my eyes to adjust to the darkness, making only mere silhouettes of the obstacles beyond my reach of sight. Each step I take illuminates the sound of the floor beneath my feet. A single fluorescent light flickers in the distance of the seemingly endless hall, providing a mild passage of sight into the path ahead. The visible hall is somewhat cluttered by hospital beds and crumbling fibers of the dropped ceiling, insulation from the busted walls along with residuals of smoke along the wall and floor, and a stain of red in the shape of a handprint. A typical horror scene. Armed with only a disoriented mind, without recollection of my arrival, I pushed on to find a way of escape. Then something morbid, startling. Fearing for the worst, I bent down, thinking that I would become sick. I dry heaved, and in the back of my head was pierced with a rush of heat, pain, and dried blood, only to reveal that I must have been blindsided by some lunatic and dragged here for God knows whatever reason. Well, that's the only conclusion that I could conjure up at the moment. And at this point, I probably don't want to think of what really happened. Room 304 reveals long hair passing the threshold to the entrance of the room, the rest of which to be seen. Out of curiosity, I made an approach, once again fearing what was attached to the hair, and on the inside of the room, to my surprise and pure terror, a corpse of a girl littered the floor, dressed in what looks like a hospital gown. Everything else in the room completely sprawled with the wreckage of what looks like a violent outburst, an attack of some sort. Yes, a violent event taking place in this room in particular, leading to what seems like a riot and a series of other violent attacks and small fires into the corridors outside. Dear God, what could have happened here, I thought, with such a voice trying to hold in my sickness. What happened? And why am I here? I thought of myself once again. Suddenly, a crashing of thunder, just outside of the room. Moments later, loud, terrified screams is refracted off the cracked walls of the hall. I glanced up for a brief second, alarmed at the sight of a spinning wheel of an overturned wheelchair rotating like an empty merry-go-round at an abandoned park. I turned to look back, now overdosed on adrenaline, and the girl is standing straight up, holding a stuffed bear to her heart, staring into my soul with eyes stitched halfway shut. Her physical appearance reveals events of the past, abuse, and a mass depression, lips cracked to bleed, as if she was brutally beaten, tortured, and left to die. I would assume that she was around 9 or 10 years of age. The corpse opens her mouth to speak, only to whisper under her putrid breath so quiet. It's nearly impossible to understand clearly. "Welcome home," the little girl said. in a shrill voice that was almost washed out by the sound of the now beating rain outside. "You missed all the fun you started." Decayed teeth fall out of her mouth with every single word spoken, hitting the ground while blood runs down from her lips to the stuffed bear and the hospital apparel. I was petrified with fear, unable to utter even the slightest of sounds. Getting on all fours, she crawls between my legs, knocking me off my feet, then onto the walls like a spider. Disappeared into the ventilation shaft, dropping the bear behind her. The stale environment was disrupted by the sound of a series of loud thuds and scratching nails on the foundation of the shaft as pieces of crumbling ceiling give way. A childish laugh has echoed through the vents as the sound of nails screeching along a chalkboard penetrates the air, an almost deafening screech, to be exact. Lying on the ground in disbelief of the event that just took place, the palms of my hand and forehead begin to sweat as the beat of my heart is replaced by the beat of a war drum, visible to an over-pulsating chest. Finally, after the nearly 30 seconds that seemed like a lifetime was over, I took refuge in the room. The only thoughts that raced in my head were the sound of her voice. What did she mean, welcome home? That bear that she had was somehow hung by a noose, dead center in the room. Its head with a small spill of blood on its right ear, with button eyes gazing forward as it swings to and fro. I closed my eyes, praying this nightmare would just end. The sound of the overturned wheelchair still plagued my thoughts, as the wheels keep turning. And now, I know I'm not alone. Will woke up coughing and wheezing. He had horrible allergies and had fragile lungs, so smoke made him have fits. And this was a smoke fit. He glanced around his single-bedroom apartment. He didn't see any fire, but something did catch his eye. By the open window, moonlight fluttered in, illuminating what looked like a white sports coat. "Hello?" Will called out, sliding his hand all over his nightstand for his flashlight. He grabbed it, turned it on, and pointed it at a shadowy figure. He jumped upon the sight, seeing the tall figure. The figure was tall, maybe 6 feet 7. He wore a white sports coat, matching dress pants. He wore a black collared shirt with a blood-red tie. His hands were pale white, with long, sharp red claws. But what truly terrified Will was his head. It had no features, and was completely pitch black, as if he were from a child's cartoon, where the head of an adult couldn't be seen. Smoke slowly emanated from behind the tall figure. Will started to have another coughing fit as the figure approached. The noise of the city faded into silence, and all he could hear was the creaking of the floorboards under his feet and heavy breathing of the ebony-headed man. Only the man was at the foot of Will's bed. He began to speak in a calm, very low voice. "The ritual has been performed. The sacrifice has been given. The client expects results." What? Will managed to say, his breath trembling with fear. What are you going to do to me?" "The client has given her sight so that you may be removed." The figure ran the claws of his index finger along Will's face, causing a horrible second-degree burn. "With only her hate to provide her with warmth, my client gave her sight and freedom so that you may meet a horrible fate." "Why? Who?" Will asked, flinching away from the heat of his claw. coughing even harder.
My client is the one whose life you ruined. She is the one who had the sister you killed. My client,
he continued, touching Will's bedsheets, creating a small fire,
is the one who wanted you to know a horrible fate and know my name. A name you have never felt for what you did. A name that you shall feel as you burn until you fade away.
What's your name? Will asked in terror, pissing himself in fear, beginning to cough up blood.
I am Regret.
The police found the charred remains of Will Boris Jack and the burnt remains of what they assume was his bed. The remarkable thing was, the sign of fire was contained only to the corners of the apartment that the bed was in. The more disturbing thing was written all over the walls of the single-bedroom apartment were the words, "His name is Regret."